I do like a general welcome to OASIS,
Okay.
and I'll introduce you.
Okay, let's go. We're in.
Okay. Bienvenidos, bienvenidas. Welcome to OASIS, the video game exhibition presented by ESNE University. Today we'll be having a series of talks related to the video games and to all the concepts behind OASIS. We'll beginning now with the museums and video games. And we are having Pablo Nogueira as host of this panel. So without further ado, I'll leave you all with Pablo.
Hello, I'm Pablo from the Games academic team here at ESNE, and I'll be your host for this first session of the OASIS discussions. The topic of the session is the connection between museum exhibitions and video games. There is a direct connection, namely exhibitions about all aspects of video games, the history, the culture, the impact on culture, and so on. But there are more connections, like the use of video games or gamification techniques by museums, the commissioning of games by galleries and museums, the use of immersive technology, such as augmented and virtual reality, which leads us to virtual exhibitions, of which we are hearing more about after the COVID pandemic. There are many topics on the connection. I'm going to introduce the participants. I'm going to start with Sacha from London and Gloucestershire, who is a freelance museum professional. Sacha, hello. He's worked at UK and international museums and galleries. He's produced many events, managed educational programs, and he builds escape rooms, virtual and physical. Warm welcome to you, Sacha.
Thank you so much for having me, Pablo. It's amazing to be introduced by a squirrel as well. I'm loving this. This is very immersive, exactly what we've been talking about. Will I jump in to do the presentation now, Pablo?
No, I'm going to introduce Olivia and then Danielle, and then I'll let you start with your presentation. So the second panelist is Olivier Mauco from Paris. He's a game creator and researcher with several academic publications and books on various aspects of video games. He's interested in serious games and in the cultural, political, and ideological influences and implications of games. A warm welcome to you, Olivia. I hope you can hear us. And finally, Daniel Sánchez Mateos from Madrid. He's a well-known lecturer at ESNE. He's the CEO of Gamera Nest, a games studio, and he's the coordinator of the Spanish PlayStation Talents. Daniel has a huge trajectory in industry, and he has collaborated with the education department of Madrid's Mesa Museum. He's created a Nubla game, which has a storyline based on the museum's collection. A warm welcome to you, Daniel, although this is your house. Before we start, don't miss the video games exhibited by our final year students on the Matching Games website. The exhibition is also taking place live simultaneously with this OASIS event. So I'd like our panelists to tell us about their views and experience in the connection between video games and museum exhibitions. They've prepared a presentation. So Sacha, please, you can share a screen with us and let us know your views and experience on this topic.
Awesome. Thank you, Pablo, and thank you for having me today. So we'll just do a quick, won't be more than 10 minutes introduction to my work and my interests. So apologies, there's a little bit of vanity here. This is like my vanity slides talking about myself. But I came to mix video games with museum work in that I've been working in museums now for well over 10 years at a number of museums around the world. But I'm also a huge fan of video games. I've been playing video games since I was 5 years old. And for me, both museums and video games, there is this kind of unique connection, which is about storytelling. So what I've done a lot through my work is to try and find ways that I can connect these two interests and also get people that might not usually go to museums to connect with museums and history and heritage through a love of video games. So if you want to talk to me afterwards or get in touch, one of the best ways to find me is my Twitter handle, which is just below there at Sacha Coward. And you can also find my email on my website. So I'm happy to answer any questions that don't get covered in this talk. I've put a few photos up here just to give you a sense of the kind of work that I do. So the top left image, the image of me with that weird little homemade alien, That's at the Victorian and Albert Museum in London, where I built a pop-up escape room. So for those that don't know, an escape room is a game that happens in real life. It takes 1 hour and you have to solve a bunch of puzzles, often to escape or to solve some kind of problem. And this was all themed around their exhibition about video games. This happened about 4 years ago. The image in the middle with me wearing the weird hat and the Pikachu, if you play Pokemon, you might notice that I'm basically cosplaying as a character from one of the newer Pokemon games. But this was a tour of the British Museums. This is a tour, this picture took place at the British Museum, where I did an entire tour about the history of Pokemon. So even though the British Museum is full of ancient stuff, I covered loads of things that relate to those. We'll go into a bit more detail about each of these projects in a moment, but generally my work is around history, heritage, but also inclusion. So the bottom right image there, this is a photo of a group of people in London, all of whom are working in museums, and we're part of LGBTQ+ Pride in museums. So we march every year at London Pride, which is for lesbian, gay, bisexual and trans people, to show the connection there. So you'll see that coming through my work a little bit too. So the first thing before I get into my work, the reason I think it is important and legitimate to look at video games in museums is for a long time, video games have been seen as a way of wasting time or a silly game that children play, or a thing that only young boys play. All of these are incorrect. Now, video games have been around at least since the 1950s. It's debatable exactly when they started, but they became kind of massively consumed from the 70s and onwards. They are a legitimate art form. So both in the games themselves, the worlds that are created, the constructions and the technologies that are created are created by artists. Video game designers and developers are in many ways artists, but also the people that play in those worlds. So this is an image of Minecraft where someone has constructed an entire reproduction of the Mona Lisa pixel by pixel. So people are creating art in video games. And it's only recently that we're starting to respect video games in the same way that we would respect a painting or a photograph or an ancient artifact. And I think it's really important that we get over this outdated idea that video games are not art. We need to start treating them as an important form of heritage. As an interesting example as well, video games are played by a lot of people. If you look at that chart on the bottom right with the yellow, green and blue lines, you'll see that in 2021, the video game industry was making more money than the film industry and the music industry, the entire industry combined. The video game industry is enormous, and it is not just played by white heterosexual men. It is played by all kinds of people. Today, 46% of the people who play games online define as women. Now, that's not exactly 50%, but it's very close, and it is getting closer with every single day. If you look at the chart on the bottom left, you will see that the people who most play video games are stereotypically men between the ages of 21 and 35. But the next two groups are both groups of women. So the stereotypical gamer doesn't really exist. Everybody is playing video games. So this is an example of an escape room that I built, which is where I get a group of people to come into a museum, and for 1 hour, they are inhabiting a video game. They are playing a game, they are solving puzzles, and they have 1 hour to work together to do this. So this was a game that I built for the Victorian and Albert Museum, all based around the history of video games, everything from Pac-Man through to The Legend of Zelda. We use that as a way to explore it. These are, I mentioned, the tours that I do at the British Museum. So what I do here, and you'll see there's a large group of people that have come on this tour. These are people who might not necessarily go to the British Museum, but they all share an interest in video games. And by telling them about the backstory to some of their favorite video game characters, some of the games that they play, and ancient history. So the image on the left there, I'm stood next to a Hindu sculpture of a character called Garuda, which is also the inspiration for a character in Final Fantasy. the image on the right, I was stood in front of an Egyptian cat, which was used in the Tomb Raider series. So it was a way to ground history in the things that people already love. So video games are a way to do that. And this is a tour, a virtual tour that I built for the Museum of London. It was called Cyber City. And the idea of this was to go around their collection, again, looking at the ancient Roman artifacts, the medieval artifacts, and explain how they connect to the stories that we tell in video games. So in this case, looking at the Legend of Zelda and the character of Link and how he is inspired by Peter Pan, but also from some Roman forest deities and how the Japanese creators used some of that symbolism, which comes from ancient history. I also use video games a lot during lockdown as a way to talk to people. During the COVID epidemic, many people were stuck at home and many people were playing video games. So for the Pride season for lesbian, gay, bisexual and trans people, I've been using video games as a way to talk about LGBT history, looking at the history of LGBTQ people as game developers, game designers, but also characters and representations in video games. So this was a talk called Space Invaders, which I have run for a number of companies, a number of charities virtually during lockdown to explore LGBT history in a slightly different way. This was a project that I ran for the National Video Game Museum. So in the UK, there is a video game museum in Sheffield, which focuses on video games and the history around that. And this was a project working with young people aged 16 to 25. And we worked virtually during COVID to develop a project for the museum. And in the end, they built an immersive trail and escape room that happens across the video game museum. These were young people who loved video games and maybe had never considered a career in museums. But by matching them with the National Video Game Museum, we were able to bring this out. And some of them are now looking into careers or going on to explore working for museums and heritage. So it's making that connection, which is really interesting. So that's the end of my just an example of some of the things that I have worked on, where kind of linking video games and museums together. And I think my main take home, the important points that I think you can take forward are: one, there are some natural connections between video games and history. History and museums are about storytelling. They're about telling really good stories. They're about telling important stories. That is also what modern video games are about too. The next thing is there is a huge audience of people who love video games, huge audience, very diverse. And if you link their interests with your museum, you now have a group of people who maybe have never come before, who are suddenly going to be very excited to explore your collection. Anyway, I really excited to hear the other projects and have a chat with you later, Pablo. Thank you.
Thank you, Sacha. You've been spot on. Only 40 seconds left. Very well done. So now, Olivier, Mauco, please take control of the screen and let us know your views and experiences on the connection between museums and video games.
Thank you very much. I'm going to make a presentation of one use case we did with Centre Pompidou, which is one of the Museum of Modern Art, which is Prism 7, a video game we produced in order to promote modern art and to help young audiences to discover what it is and how it is built. So we launched it on April 24th, 2020 during the lockout in Paris. It was financed by the Ministry of Education. Also, we made it with our friend with Bright and ERCAM Amplify, ERCAM, which is dedicated to the sound in France. It's a specific institute making very sound innovative things. And why did we want it to do that, and why the museum wanted to do this? Because they wanted to open a new conversation about art in a new way, new forum to engage new audiences with this specific medium, to read them. Maybe people they don't manage to get into the museum, if they don't manage to get them into the museum, it could be interesting if they could go to them. So they use the video game as a tool and as a space for meeting new audiences or other audiences. This is very interesting because they want it to be outside their own world, and also they got a kind of mission to be innovative in terms of education, especially. And then they wanted to explore the link between gaming and video games and museum, of course, because in France, we've got some legitimation going on since 10 years ago, but it's still new and nobody say, okay, video games, is it art or not? So for them, it was a way to explore that. So here is a trailer. I hope the sound will be okay. So here is 7 hours long. It's 1 hour and a half. I'm sorry, but it's 7 levels. You can have it on Steam, also PC, Mac, Android, iOS, available in 4 languages. The idea is really to do something with the wider audience possible. One point interesting from the educational approach is that we wanted to make a game according to the philosophy to educate, which is doing and then learn what you've done and link what you've done with masterpieces. They always start at some Pompidou with personal experience, super things to do, to manipulate, and then to connect that to a higher level of art and everything dedicated to masterpieces. Then how we made that, we work on different levels which were linked with some very specific issue. For example, color should be understood as something functional. Maybe in paintings they use color as systems, especially if you think about Vasarely or algorithmic art. Activism, a way to say, okay, color can be political, can be emotional, can be spiritual. And also we work on light as something physical and light as something very immersive, like a lesson or doing things like that. So we've got a corpus of 7 to 10 masterpieces in each level, and we made a recreation, a kind of interpretation of this specific stuff. And that's interesting because we wanted to push the idea that gameplay is the medium in the game, meaning that the way you interact, the way you are going to solve the challenges and the issues is very, let's say, full of content and very expressive. And that's why we work on dedicated gameplay in order to convey a message, to understand why light can be material, and you got this level where you project your shadow and you can work on it. It's a materialization of light, etc. So we also went to the biggest gamers event in France, Paris Games Week. It was a way to have a stand and to show to the gamers that the museum was coming to them. And it was a very interesting way to communicate also. And then we integrated that into national resources for education in order to promote it through this platform to the different schools, high schools, and they created what you see here, a kind of itinerary station that is here to show the game and to showcase it in many places. From things we had in mind, what could we think about gaming and museum? From museum perspective, how to put some game elements into the visits is always something that's really interesting for them. How to promote video games or games also as piece of art. And from them, it's a way to reach new audiences. They made one game, but maybe they could be over games in order to be more adequate to the sociology of gamers. You know, there are many gamers, many games played, etc. And from our perspective, what we wanted to think about is how to produce game content, to develop many content, to create something valuable as a business model also, because how do you sell video games and how do you get paid for that? And then to think the game as a social space. And at that time, we were thinking about things dealing with metaverses. And I'm talking about that because we made also this thing, if I get 1 minute more, not this one, but this one with the Cité des Sciences et de l'Industrie, which is a science museum. And we created on VR chat this social visit and experiment with avatars in order to develop what it is and how is it the metaverse. It's an exhibition online on the metaverse for the Cité des Sciences et de l'Industrie. And then we had also designed a kind of a headhunt into the city where you could grab some NFT and put them into the social space, some kind of articulation with real world, metaverse, and all this stuff like that. What's interesting here is to develop some social visits with people online and with money content, like a classical exhibition, but sometimes with fun element because you get some games in it and things to do also. So here is my short presentation on that. We do consider a game as a very important medium to really promote and to educate in other way. This is a kind of medium, of course, and so it's interesting to use them as well as other medium to talk about it, to make people play or discover art. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Olivia. Very nice presentation. Well, now is the turn for Danielle. You have also 10 minutes for a presentation, and when we finish, I'll ask you guys a few questions. So Danielle, please take control of the screen and unmute your microphone. You have to unmute your microphone, Danielle. It's muted. No, still muted.
Okay.
There you
Are
go.
you seeing my presentation? Yes. Are you seeing my presentation?
We are seeing, yeah.
In the screen. Okay. So I will be more brief because, as I said, my English is not so good to explain in large mode all that we do, but I prefer to explain a little of our story as a company, okay? When we begin working in video games, serious video games or educational video games, we begin closer to the new narratives that in the first decade of the 2000 we were experimenting in the video games, like video games like Pasadas or that Dragon Cancer, so as how we can work with new ways to tell stories in the video games with the interactive ways that video games allows. So we begin in that time. I was working in ESNE, precisely as teacher, a lecturer, and we want to work with the students, not thinking in the museums, but thinking in the narrative or I say the possibilities of to tell stories in the video games. So we begin to have reference and to begin with the students to work in what can we tell through video games. In different sessions, we experiment with the language, we experiment with the art, we experiment with the literature, and finally, we begin to make a first video game based in a side the art of the woman in the woman house in Los Angeles, And for in other ways, working with some filming reference or other video games reference. And we finally obtained a video game or a prototype of a video game that was very interesting from not only from the point of view of the narrative, but in the point of view of the art. So we have the opportunity to present it in the Museo Nacional Centro de Arte Reina Sofía, where we saw our work, and it was seen for the Museum de Mesa, where we begin to make the first video game directly made for a museum that is Nubla. I don't want to tell about Nubla again, because it was a video game that has almost 10 years ago, 10 years old right now. But and I know that you know this game, but was an experience. I always say that it began that an experience. They didn't want to make a video game for the museum. They wanted to make an experiment with the picture in the museum and with the video game narrative. That was the reason because we worked with them. And finally, we obtained a video game for PlayStation, so it introduced our experience or our narrative into directly in the gamers, in a sector, in a space only for the gamers, and in the cultural side, it was very interesting, but it was more interesting to see, like the gamers, to confront the experiment, or to play with a video game that it was not was made thinking for them. The most interesting experience that I can remember of that time was the way to work Nubla. We always try to work in it in a collaborative way, with no leads, with no directors of the project. It was by to vote the decisions and to vote how to work in it, and with people entering and exiting of the project in the time of to work in it. But that we learn making Nubla, we used to work with other museums that they had interested in our work. For example, el Museo Arqueológico Nacional in Madrid decided to speak with us and to try to repeat the same experience of Nubla with the history in a project called Hominidae that brought us to the new conflict, or the new fight, to try to make a video game teaching history from the point of view of the academic, of the conservator, of the museum, but to give them the video game to the public, the general public, that they are 2 points of view very different, or very they are looking for different things when they see the museum. In the same way, we work with the Espacio Fundación Telefónica, working in several expositions that when they propose a thematic, or like Barney or like Houdini in a time, even they ask us to work. I'm going to jump this slides. They ask to ask us to work with the entire building and history of Movistar, of Telefónica, and in all that project, we always try to mix that the point of view, as I say, of the museum, that with the interest of the likeness of the public. In the same way, we tried it because it's the past. Sorry, we tried to bring an experience of learning or experimental in the form of classes with alums or with the volunteers, trying to learn how to build a video game from other sides, not only of the technical or the that they usually learn in the schools. One of our last experiment before pandemic was Bona with the Museum of Ukraine, where we work at distance with the women of that museum. That they give us the story, they give us the story and the philosophy of the museum, and we try to transform it in a video game that is explaining that they feel in Ukraine. Right now, this video game that was stopped because of the pandemic has been relaunched, and we are working in a new version for PC that it was only for mobile, because we feel that right now with the situation in Ukraine, they need to recover the remember of the land and their history. So and that we do. As Pablo said, in a moment we entered in the PlayStation program for to do the video game, the Nubla 2 video game for PlayStation again. The first Nubla was a big successful, not only in download that they had a lot, but also with the noise of the low noise that make in the cultural world in Spain, and even out of frontiers. So when PlayStation asked to do the second part, we believe that it will be very interesting to work with them in the new way to work that they created in that time. Right now, I'm direct the PlayStation Talents program because I believe that it's very interesting to translate or to transport our way to work to other groups or teams of developers. But the opportunity with the PlayStation allows us to meet a lot of developers of all kinds of video games. That is very interesting because we can speak with them or to tell about different ways to work, and not even that, but to go to events or fairs or the E3, for example, where we can see who is the industry, and at the same time, how can we to take the video games from the museum or cultural video games to that industry, how to match both of them. Nubla 2 was released in 2019, and it was a very, very, very huge video game respect the first one. More interesting in my point of view and my way to see it, but it's not the end of our way. We are trying to make in the next game that we are doing right now, to follow with the experimentation and to follow with the ways that we can work with the narrative. Always is the narrative. We are only focused in the museum right now because with the pandemic it was more difficult to work with them, but we begin to work with other languages like audiovisual narrative in the cinema or of the literary narrative, and above all that I'm more a member of that time, and that I am fighting to recover right now. That when the pandemic is standing, is the way to work with all the people that is integrating the culture world, that is integrating the video game world, how to join them, and to begin to make the new steps in the language of the video games. The metaverse, for example, is very interesting for us because
you have to wind up because the time is up.
no, okay. It's I was finishing right now. The metaverse is very interesting, and we are working in that to make the mix between the metaverse and the culture. Thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paulo.
Thank you, all of you. Very interesting presentations. One of the things that I've noticed is that many companies or entities, they want to have a game developed to promote their products. So it makes sense that the exhibitions also want to do that. But I'd like to ask you, all of you, and maybe we could start with Sacha. Where do you see the future of this use of video games for exhibitions going?
It's really interesting, and there were some really beautiful examples of gaming in both of your talks. I was really taken away by that video, Olivia, the one with for the Pompidou Center. It looked gorgeous. I'm really interested that I'm seeing museums are starting to produce games and creating gamified content. Sometimes one of my concerns is they're producing a game because they know that games are popular and that they're cool, but they don't necessarily know about the mechanics of gaming. And so, for example, to make a game fun and stimulating and exciting, that's like another side of it. So I think that it's nice to know that the people who are immersed in the worlds of gaming are the people that are answering those calls. Because sometimes when museums work on a game, they can create a game that's actually very dull because it's all about their collection and all about their stories and not necessarily so much about the joy of gaming. So one of the things I can see happening in the future is at the moment I see museums reaching out to game developers to produce games. I'm imagining that we're going to see more going the other way. And we already see some of it. So some video games are having to go to, if they're setting a game in Assassin's Creed and it's set in ancient Greece or ancient Rome, they'll go and look at a collection. But rather than it being the Pompidou Center producing a game, what if game developers went to museums for inspiration as well? So that's something I hope to see, more of a collaborative process that I think will lead to better games. If that happens.
Yeah, definitely. So the old games will go to the museums. That makes more sense. Yes, because the mechanics and the design is very important. And it's true, some of the games out there are very dull. You're right about that. What's your point of view about this, Olivia? Sorry, you have to unmute your microphone.
Yes. Yeah, what I see in France is that they are developing a lot of immersive exhibition using new technologies, full projection on walls, etc. And it's interesting because this is merging digital and physical stuff. So maybe inside the world of the exhibition, the use of interactivity and game should be stronger or more developed, we'll see in following years. And also what I think is, to make something great, they should make a mutualization of resources, because you can make great games, but it's also a matter of cost. I think if more museums could say, okay, we do something all together, that should be super great, because they could make very big stuff, big game for very gamers people. And also thinking about that, about the metaverse, as you said, Daniel, it's very interesting, because today, where do they go? I was in Bologna also talking about this, and very eager to go there, but maybe there's something to do for a public institution or art institution or playful, a kind of mix or something to develop and to put in common. And I do think the key is to maybe one game is not the good solution. It should be a better, bigger game with 2, 3, 4 institutions working together to have a nice budget in order to be competitive, of course, against the other games, because this is the idea also. If you produce a game as an institution, you need to be at the level of what people are used to play.
That's true. As you say, that's very expensive. It can be very expensive depending on how far you want to go, especially with immersive technology, which is something that we haven't talked about yet, but we will. So I'm going to ask Daniel about his point of view about this question.
Yeah, I believe as my partners, I see the same that they see, but I believe that problem right now is, as I say, the pandemic. Museums right now are thinking about how to affront the new age, the new public or the interest of the public. You can see how the public was lower from the last year, and they are recovering the interest of the people, but right now they are very worried about to make the same things that they can do before that 2 years that we have lost. So in that way, I believe that to use the video game, to use the gamification, to use the new technologies can be a new way for them. As I said, they are very interested into try in the new virtual worlds that we are opening in the metaverse, but I believe or I feel that they are in a confusing time, more or less.
Yeah, it's confusing, and at the same time, you have to walk a very thin line, because if you, for example, create an immersive experience and then people go just for the experience and not for the exhibition, it beats the purpose. So what do you think about ways of overcoming this, Sacha? How can the game creators make sure that the product is actually at the end?
Yeah, I think it is a real challenge, because you have to make the game's connection to the museum or the collection or the art meaningful. So if you are almost tricking people into engaging with your collection because there's a cool game, so people will come on their phone and play a game and look at the artifact and go, well, you know, why am I here? Or what is this connection? It breaks away, and you end up with maybe a semi-fun game, and still no one's necessarily engaging with the collection. And I think a little bit of the issue, it's almost like putting sugar in the medicine to try to get someone to take their medicine. It's treating the history like it's this thing that, you know, that is bad, but you have to have it, so we're going to put it into a video game to make it more accessible. And so I think we need to shake up the thinking a little bit. And some of the projects that you've been showing are doing exactly this. But I think we need to go to where gamers are. So one of the examples I keep thinking about is Dungeons and Dragons, right? It's not officially a video game, it's a tabletop game, but it's huge right now. All over the world, because of the likes of Stranger Things, it's become very popular. There's been a huge resurgence. Why aren't museums inviting people to come and play Dungeons and Dragons in the museum after hours? Just think of the storytelling being inspired by the collections, and you could create a really meaningful connection between the spaces and the games that people are playing. So I think it is a challenge. The challenge is not just to make a game for the sake of it. I remember with Pokemon Go, when that was huge, like 10 years ago, whatever it was, everybody was kind of doing that thing where they would, yes, our museum is going to be a stop on Pokemon Go. So people would go over on their phones, beep, 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 but they're not looking at anything. It doesn't mean anything. It just is an excuse to get people into the museum. So there's a two-way conversation that needs to happen. Museum workers that want to make games need to understand what games are and what they do and why they work. And game developers that are working with museums, you know, us, we need to understand more what the museum is trying to do. And those two things need to go hand in hand. That's when you get a successful game.
Well, thank you, Sacha. What's your point of view, Olivia?
I think there is something we should develop, and the fact is, museum is a space. I think we can redesign this space representation through level design. I think one of the most art of video game is level design. And I do believe that if we think as an exhibition place as a level of a video game, maybe we should be very interesting about the narrative, the way you're going to experience the masterpiece here, etc. And that should be super fun. And we witnessed that, maybe not in the art field, but in the big, you talked about Stranger Things. We've got this special shop in Paris, they open the Stranger Things experience. I think this is something here we need to really consider. Maybe we don't produce video games, but game and level design should be at the core of producing new exhibition, because it's very, I think, interesting and powerful to, because the way the scenography is old school, it was a way, it was like that a decade, 20 years, 40 years ago. But I think we need to evolve and to make the museum as a new space, a playful space. And I think it's really doable. And I see what you've done, and the VA is super great. It's here how you can make people experience a space in another way through games mechanics, level mechanics, etc. And maybe not digital at all. It should be just role-playing, paper, whatever, but games.
Exactly, yes, gamification. Daniel, what's your point of view before we ask some questions from the public?
It's more or less like Oliver. I'm very much with him. I believe that I remember when they built Disneylandia, it was conceived like a gameplay, like a place to play and to be fun in each step that you do that. So museums from the beginning was conceived like a place out of the world, or where the world is out of the museum, to conserve the picture, to conserve the monuments or anything, but never to dialogue with the world in the exterior. It's very difficult to change that and to begin to make to believe to the museum that it's important the experience inside them, to repeat the visit, to change the visit. One of the most interesting things of the virtual world is that it's changing all the time, and it's different age experience. In the museum, it's very rare to see the experience different in the same exposition, because the museum is static. That is very interesting to begin to speak how to make the experience in the museum changing, or to make it more interactive and different every time that you visit the museum, to make to people to repeat that experience, to repeat to go to the museum 2 times in a month, or 2 times in a year. That is very difficult right now, because the people goes to the museum 1 time in 5 years, for example.
But do you think people no longer go to museums because there is a sort of some generational change, or because the museums don't reach to people in the way the other cultural entities do? What do you think, Sacha?
Yeah, the first thing I want to say is I love the idea of bringing level design into exhibition or museum design. I think that's great. I love the idea, like, what does a final boss look like in an art gallery? The final painting that you have to interpret. I love that. But yeah, in terms of what you're saying, why do people say, why do gamers or why are games so popular, but museums are struggling? I love museums, but they are struggling. And it is because most museums don't quite know what they are. And as Daniel was saying, they're quite dated. They are not moving with the times. If you grew up going to museums, if you're lucky enough to have parents or family that took you to museums, you know how to behave in those spaces. You can make your own fun, you can explore. If you didn't, and you go to a museum, you're in a big space full of paintings. And what? Like, what do I do? You spend 10 minutes looking around, then you go to the gift shop and you buy a coffee, and then you leave. You take a photo with a painting and it's done. So yeah, museums, there is whilst I love museums, there is a pretension that we are these special places. We are so important. So come in and don't question us. You will have to go and find your own experience. Whereas video games are the opposite. You play a game, it teaches you how to play. It takes you through the level. It guides you to the direction to have the most fun possible. So I think there's a lot museums can learn from game design to become the kind of experiences where teenagers aren't falling asleep and plugging their phones in, where they're actually engaging, which games are already doing so successfully. I think some museums are already doing some really great stuff. That's unfair to say all museums are bad, but a lot of museums are falling behind, and you can see by the numbers, people are not going to museums in the same numbers as they used to, and that's a real shame.
Do you think that's a right view, Olivia?
Yeah, I was thinking when you were talking about the fact that I did enjoy the new Reina Sofia editorial approach. It's very assume that we make an exhibition through politics, point. All art is political, from exhibition and first art to the nowadays. And I think this is the same thing as making novel or narrative design. It's the idea that editorial content should be games or other stuff, but very powerful in order to make you understand what's happening, the link between the artists, how it evolves, the impact on society, etc. I think we are from a vision of art as something away from society. Museum should be away, as you say, Daniel, should be, this is picture spaces, okay. But I do think artists were not away from society. They were really in the society, sometimes for, sometimes against, talking about that. And reintroducing narrative, gameplay, narrative design. Also, we talk about level design, but narrative design also is super interesting in games. Or are you going to tell a story through the exploration of a space? All this stuff really are something we could consider. And yes, many museums I think they need to rethink what they are, especially in 2022 with metaverses, video games, network, social networks, whatever, and the fact that we are competing with our stuff outside. And the outside stuff are beginning to be super exhibition places, entertainment places. So how do you compete? Because this is the point. People don't come back to museum, but a museum can compete against Disneyland, against a super flagship store in Champs-Élysées or in Reina Sofia, whatever. It's here, I think, the thing. We need to consider that, but it's not a way to say we lower the quality. No, I think we need to make the quality higher. This is the only solution.
I see. Finally, Danielle, do you want to say something before I ask another question?
Yeah, and I have not much to add to that because I think the same. No problem. You can take the same question.
Yes, so I have a question from someone who goes to museums very often, and he's disappointed that when he goes to a museum, for example, paintings, he likes to stare at the painting and enjoy it and not do anything else, and then move to the next one. And what he expects, this is what he says, is that the painting is well shown and then with well lit, and he can appreciate it. Now, do you think adding gamification to this type of people will put them off? I mean, maybe you attract new viewers, but the old classical hardcore museum goers will be a bit disappointed by all the artificiality, or maybe not. Maybe they'll enjoy it. What's your point of view, Sacha?
So my answer is I understand that. There are, I'm going to the British Museum later today. I find Aztec history fascinating. I've been reading about the Aztecs, so I have an understanding. When I go to a gallery there, I can look at those artifacts for a long time, and I know things, so it sort of talks to me. I don't need a phone, right? That's something I'm passionate about. if you're passionate about paintings and you stand in front of a painting and that does it for you, that's amazing. But adding gaming or an element of gamification doesn't stop the painting from hanging there. It doesn't mean you have to play the game. It doesn't mean that there's going to be like lasers and sound effects playing around the painting. It's an additional layer that for some people, for a lot of people, in fact, will be really helpful. But I don't think any of us are saying, stop having paintings or create spaces where you can't have that quiet, contemplative, respectful connection to an artifact. The issue is to be able to look at a painting and engage with it for a long time. It does require a certain level of experience and understanding. You maybe have had a history where you have studied or you've been around art, or people have told you about art, or something in your life has got you excited about it. That's great. We wouldn't want to get rid of that. But for many people, they don't have that connection. And so when they're looking at a painting, they're not getting what you are. So this is a way for some people to have that same experience that you were already having naturally. And I wouldn't take that away from you. I would add layers of understanding.
That's a very good answer. So you will complement the picture and add all the experiences that you don't have. The viewer, for example, by reproducing the history or bringing in some sort of animation or something that explains how the painter painted the painting. I mean, it's really a good idea. Do you agree with that also, Olivia?
Yeah, I do agree. It's super right. We don't need to change 100% what's the point of museum, which is discovering artworks. This is a core experience, but the way you're going to discover it, I think. It's about discovery because, as you say, I'm hanging around, oh, there is a beautiful painting. This is a theory in art saying, oh, the emotional shock, saying, wow, it's beautiful. But the truth is the emotional shock exists because it talks to you, as you said, and it talks to you because you are interested, you've got the cultural level to understand that, the key of understanding, etc. This is very elite-oriented approach. And I think this is not popular, and that should be popular also are to make people access to that and to enjoy it.
Okay, thank you. So Danielle, your final word. We are 3 minutes before we finish the session. I'd like to know.
I will be brief. I believe that in the museum there are different people and different kinds of public, and we can't change the public in the museum. We need to speak that they need to hear us, and there will always will be people that they don't need more than the museum offers to them. I remember that we did a video game about different public in the museum, and it was very interesting to work with that from the point of view of the video game, because it's very significant how to people enter in the museum affairs. But we believe the layers are important, and how much people we are losing because we don't give us the layer that they need, and that is our work.
Okay, so yeah, very good answers. So if I can make a quick summary before we leave, because it's 2 minutes before 2 o'clock and people and the session will be over. I think, if I'm correct, that what you're suggesting is that we enhance experience where the art form is at the center, and using all the technology and the ideas and gamification that video games provide. And of course, also games in general, Olivia suggested, not only video games, but also games physically and all the types of interactive experiences. Thank you very much, Sacha, Olivia, and Danielle, for being here with us. And we hope to see you in ESNE sometimes and keep in touch. I hope you stay for the rest of the sessions. And thank you to everyone at home watching the presentation and the talk. And don't miss, as I said, the Matching Games website, where our students are presenting their work. And great pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.